Hi, I'm Tiffany Young with IdeateTV, and I'm here with Charlie Clouser. He is a music composer for movies such as Saw and Wayward Pines, as well as the band 9 Inch Nails. So how did you get into the industry, and when did you first know that you wanted to be a music composer?
Well, a lot of the records that I was involved in making were very sort of cinematic. They weren't just sort of pop songs. They were very dark and had heavy sounds and a lot of, atmospheric interludes and so forth in a lot of those records. And so the kind of movies that I've become involved with are usually, either horror movies or science fiction or mystery, something that responds well to dark sounds and sort of depressing melodies and chord structures. And so the transition, the kind of stuff that I used to work on in the record side is just kind of a natural fit. It's obviously a little bit of a different dimension, but it wasn't like I had to all of a sudden learn how to conduct an orchestra. It was because the kind of records I was always interested in were already sort of like that. So it was a natural progression, and I didn't really have to learn from scratch again. I was able to just kind of transpose what I was doing already into slightly a different arena.
Did you have any musical mentors?
Obviously the years I spent in 9 Inch Nails was those were a lot of my formative years in terms of having the freedom to create a certain kind of category of sounds and a certain to cultivate like an aggressive nature in the music that wasn't sort of heavy metal, but it had like a dark and gritty texture to it, and that was definitely something that the influences from those years have served me well, because a lot of the movies that I do have that quality to them. They're kind of gritty, and there's a lot of distorted sounds and grinding kind of tones in there, and so that was a big formative years. But even before I was involved in doing anything in the record industry, one of my first jobs ever getting paid to work on music was working as an assistant to a composer doing TV series in the late 1980s, and that was where I really got to see how the sausage gets made and see the nuts and bolts of how on a week-by-week basis they would compose the music. And my job was simple. All I had to do was do the drums and create some of the dark and evil sounds. I didn't have to think up like the piano melodies, but I was able to watch the guys that did. So those early years, and then a 15-year stretch making records and stuff, all that kind of combined to give me the influences that I draw from nowadays when I'm composing on my own.
So you've worked in TV and film. What would you say are the upsides of both?
Well, TV is, some composers really like one or the other, but I can't decide. I like them both because they're, when you're working on TV, you get to sort of try again. In other words, you do some music on this week's episode, but there'll be next week's episode, and you can improve upon that, and you can kind of refine things week by week, and also have longer kind of arcs where you might on episode 6 you might pull little pieces of melody from episode 2, and so you can create this long curve, whereas in a movie it's a one stretch and you got to get it nailed, and then it's over, and you kind of at the end you might think, I wish they'd do a sequel so I could revisit some of this stuff.
Right.
Of course, with the Saw franchise there've been a lot of sequels, so that's almost like doing a TV series in a way.
In a way,
Yeah.
Interesting. So you said your sounds and feels of your music is like a dark. Do you also enjoy movies of that genre, like horror films and that sort of thing, or does that match up with your music style?
Yeah, I mean, I'm originally more of a sci-fi nut, but in terms of like the books I read in high school and that kind of stuff. But as I get more into the music side of the movie business, now the horror movies are where you find like the craziest sounds and like the shrieking orchestra and just like really intense stuff. And so that's kind of opened my eyes to, and in the past like 10 or 15 years there's been like a resurgence of horror movies, and a lot of great directors that are younger and who kind of grew up with the same kind of movies that we were all watching in the 80s. Now they're the ones in the driver's seat, and so there's such a wide variety of stuff to watch now to draw draw influences from, both from the movies themselves and from the music that the other composers do for it.
Interesting. Do you still work with the band?
No, I haven't. I left the band Nine Inch Nails in 2001, and since then it's been 100% composing for film and TV for me.
Do you ever miss working with the band? Would you ever do it again?
I would do it again, sure. But, I was always more of a lab rat than like a road dog. When you're on tour with a band, you spend a lot of time on buses and in hotels and in restaurants, and then for 2 hours a day, you get to do that thing that you like to do. Whereas when you're composing for film or TV, you spend all day in the lab doing what you like to do. Some guys were born to be performers. I was born to be like in the studio and to just be tinkering and fiddling and trying to whittle away at the sound and get it right. And so I certainly feel at home when I have to spend a 14-hour day in the studio. That's fine by me.
Yeah. Well, last question. Since we're at WonderCon, if you could choose any superpower, what would it be and why?
Oh, to fly, definitely. I would definitely want to fly.
Really?
It would make the drive back and forth to Anaheim so much easier. Right, exactly.
As long as you're the only one up there.
Exactly.
Right. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Charlie Clouser and Tiffany Young for IdeateTV.